Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to the Online Academy with the Aquarium of the Pacific. We are so excited to be joining you today so we can talk all about wetlands. Now, before we get started, I want to remind all of you that there is a chance to text in live questions. So if you are watching this Friday morning on February 26th, feel free to text us questions at this number right here. That number is 562-286-1838. Again, that's 562-286-1838. And if you're watching this any other time besides Friday, the 26th of February, you can email us questions at live@lbaop.org, and we'd be happy to get back to you with an answer for that. Now, we're going to try our best to get as many of your questions answered live as possible, but if we don't get to it now, we'll make sure to respond in a bit. So definitely send us your questions as you can. And if you're watching with your class, teachers, if you could text us your numbers of students so that we can know how many of you are watching, that would be really, really helpful. So please just text how many students you have joining you to this number right here. I'm being joined today by Jen, so she's going to be joining me in the studio to control what you're seeing behind me on the screen here, as well as to answer your questions. So again, text us here at 562-286-1838. And like I said, today we're going to be talking all about wetlands. So I'm going to step aside so you can get a view of this wetlands. And I want you to think of what are the things that you notice. Take a look at these images that you're seeing. What do you notice about these wetlands? Have you heard of wetlands before? What comes to mind when you think of wetlands? And we'll go ahead and take a different look at some more wetlands so you can kind of see what similarities they might have. So here's another view. What do you notice that this image had in common with the one that we were just looking at? Now, a couple of the things that I'm noticing, obviously they're wet, right? That's in the name. There's a lot of water here, and that water is kind of mixed in with the land. So we have wetlands, water, and land together. So we're seeing a lot of water here, lots of land. So this is a really unique habitat. Wetlands include habitats like estuaries, swamps, marshes, all of these areas where the water is kind of meeting up with the land, and you have this really unique habitat. And these wetlands are really, really important. We'll get a chance to learn a little bit more about them and what kinds of animals that you can find there. But one of the things you'll notice if you're looking at these wetlands is how green they are. So we've got lots and lots of different types of plant life. You can see there's grass, there's trees, there's a really large variety of plants. Now I wonder, why are those plants important? How can those plants benefit this habitat? Now, when I think of other habitats that have lots of plants, I think of areas like grasslands and forests and other habitats that have lots of plants. How do the plants in a habitat help to support the animals that live there? If you're thinking food, you are correct. So having all these plants provides a really great food source for a lot of animals that live there. It also provides a protection, places to hide. So these plants are really important for the animals that live there. But wetlands aren't only important for animals that live in them, they're also important for all of us on land. And that's because these wetland areas occur between land and between water. So they kind of provide this buffer space between where we live on land and the ocean. So wetlands can be really beneficial for protecting us from things like storm surge. So when we have really big wave action coming in from storms, these wetlands can help prevent things like coastal flooding or coastal erosion. So they are really valuable for protecting us on land. To eat, that's right. So those of you that are saying that their plants are important for eating, you are absolutely correct. Now, a third reason that they're really important is something that we all love. Everybody loves baby animals, right? And wetlands are really important habitats for baby animals. So things like baby birds, my favorite, baby stingrays, baby fish, all of these animals are animals that depend on these wetlands here. Now, here we have these babies. These are our black-necked stilts that were born here at the aquarium just a couple of years ago. Look at how cute they are. So these wetland habitats are incredibly important for the animals that live in them, including these babies. Oh, that's a great question. We had a question about alligators. Do alligators live in wetlands? You are exactly right. Now, there are wetlands that can be all over the world. So there's different parts of the world that have different types of wetlands. So here in Southern California, our wetlands have animals like stingrays and black-necked stilts, other types of birds. But when you go to wetlands in other parts of the world, even other parts of the country like Florida, then you get animals like alligators in them. So you wouldn't find alligators in wetlands in Southern California, but you could find alligators in wetlands in other parts of the country. Good question. Make sure if you have any other questions, send them to us here at 562-286-1838. We look forward to answering as many of your questions as we can. And if we don't get to them now, we'll make sure to answer them later. Now, let's take a look at some other animals that live here in our wetlands. Here at the aquarium, we have a shorebirds exhibit that models one of our local wetland habitats. And in this exhibit, we've got lots of different types of birds. So we've got all these different types of birds. And I want you to take a look at this egret and tell me what you notice about this egret. What are some of the things that makes this bird special? What kind of makes it stand out? What do you notice? Now, when I look at this bird, I'm seeing a couple things. First off, I'm seeing it has this big white body. It has wings. You can see its wings, so it is a bird. It can fly. But what about here? What about the beak? What makes the beak unique? What makes the beak special? If you're noticing it's really long and thin, that's a really great observation. Now, if we look at other birds that live in wetlands, what we'll see is that a lot of them have those really long beaks. How is that long, skinny beak going to be beneficial if you're a bird that lives in a wetland? How do you think that that long, skinny beak is going to help you? Now, remember, birds have different types of beaks based on their habitat. What was that? Oh, and it has long legs. Great observation. We'll get to those legs in just a second. But that long, skinny beak, remember, birds have different types of beaks based on what type of food they're eating. That's why a parrot beak might look different than a toucan beak, which looks different than a penguin beak and looks different than a lorikeet beak. All these birds have different types of beaks based on what type of food they're eating. So birds that live in wetlands often have these long, skinny beaks because they're feeding on animals that live in the mud or in the ground. So they've got these beaks so they can kind of stick their beaks into the ground, grab little bugs that live in the water, and be able to eat those up. Very good. Beaks help them to get food in the water and to catch food. Great observation. I'm loving all these observations you guys are texting in. Keep sending them in to us. Great observation. Do eagles or snakes live in wetlands? That's a really great question. Absolutely. We can see snakes sometimes in wetlands. Eagles will sometimes visit there, especially to find food. Remember, eagles travel further distances. So they're kind of birds that might spend their time in a lot of different types of habitats, but they definitely might visit wetlands for feeding. The birds. So a bird like a snowy egret, what would a snowy egret eat? Fish, yeah. So they're going to be eating things like fish. It depends on the species, though. So certain types of birds will eat different types of things. So they might eat, the egret, like we said, eats fish, but other types of birds will eat things like little worms that they might find in the sand, little crabs they might find in the sand. So that's why sometimes you visit the beach and you see all those little birds running around the sand and sticking their beaks into the sand to try to find little critters living in the sand. Very good. Do we have any other questions right now? Do dolphins live there? That's a really great question. If you are local here to Southern California, you might remember a couple of years ago in Bolsa Chica wetlands, there was a dolphin that people were really concerned about because they thought it got stuck in the wetlands. But it was actually okay. It swam into the area. There was plenty of water. It spent a day or so kind of swimming around the area. I'm sure it found a really great source of food, tons of fish in there for it. And people were really nervous about how they could get this dolphin out. So they were trying to lure it out, trying to encourage it to swim out. And eventually the tide went up so that it had lots of water in there and it just swam out on its own. So dolphins are not usually found in wetlands, but every once in a while one might swim in there to find a little special source of food that no other dolphins are eating from. But it's not a normal habitat for them. How long are the legs of a snowy egret? Gosh, they're probably maybe, what is that, like 6 or 8 inches or so? That's a really great question, though. I do want to talk about those legs. We've had a couple of observations and comments about these legs, so I do want to take a second to talk about them. Why is it helpful for them to have such long, skinny legs? When we look at other birds, we talked about eagles earlier, we've talked about penguins a little bit. They don't have long, skinny legs like this. Why do you think a bird like an egret or those black-necked stilts we looked at earlier, why would they have these long, skinny legs? Why would that be helpful for them? Keep in mind, where do they live? These are adaptations that help them survive in this particular habitat. So why do the long legs help them to survive in this wetlands habitat? Now, if you're saying that it helps them because of all the water, you are exactly correct. So because they live in an area with a lot of water, those long legs help them kind of lift their body up above the water. So they're able to be spending some time in the wetlands, kind of walking around. Here we can see these ibises walking around through here, and look at how their legs are able to keep their body up and out of the water. Also, imagine if there's any sort of current in there. If you've ever been swimming in the beach and you get hit by a wave front on and the wave kind of knocks you down, but if you kind of turn sideways, maybe the wave doesn't hit you quite as much. That's kind of similar for these legs. It makes it so that they have less of their body that gets hit by any current or wave movement in there. So it helps them to be able to slip through the water more easily. Yeah, great observation. And again, look at these really long beaks. We're seeing a lot of these similarities, long beaks and long legs. Oh, we got another observation that the long legs help make sure the birds don't drown in the water. That's another great observation. Look at how these ibises are able to walk through the water without their bodies going underwater. If they were a short bird, if they were, a pigeon or something like that, they would have a lot more trouble walking through this water. Great observation. Oh, what kinds of plants live in wetlands? That's a really great question. Now, because wetlands make up a lot of different types of habitats, remember we have the part on land, we have the part in the water, and we have that part where they're kind of under both. So it depends on where that's located. So on land, we have a lot of grasses that live on land. And then the part under the water has a lot of sea grasses and eel grasses. Now, I'd like to take a second to take a look underwater of wetlands. We've seen a lot of the above water views of wetlands, but let's see what those wetlands look like underwater. So you end up finding a lot of things like these sea grasses and these eel grasses. So I know this looks similar to grass that you would find on land, but this grass is a little bit different because it's able to grow underwater. Now, all of these plants that you see, they have special adaptations that let them live in saltwater. So you know how saltwater is a much more difficult habitat to live in. There's a lot of extra challenges as far as living with salt and living in that salty water. So all of these plants have special adaptations that allow them to live in that salt water. Now, while we're looking at this underwater habitat, we talked a lot about the birds that live above the water, but what do you notice living underwater? We see lots of fish swimming around, but take a closer look. See if you see anything that's not swimming around. Anyone see anything hiding? If you look really closely, you might be able to see some little eyes popping up out of the sand. I think we've got one. Let's see, look right over here. Also, you can look right over here. Now, wetlands are a home of a really special, kind of sneaky fish as well. It's a home to a lot of flatfish. We'll see if we can get a picture of a flatfish so you can see it a little bit better. Here we go. Here's one hiding in the sand. Now, why do you think the flatfish looks like this? It looks really different than those silvery fish that we saw swimming around. What is the benefit of the flatfish looking like this? We notice that, first off, instead of swimming straight up and down, it's on its side. Why do you think a flatfish might be living on its side? And what do you notice about its coloration? I'm noticing it's really hard to see. If I didn't know it was there, I might not be able to see it, in fact. And that's because it uses this really great camouflage. So flatfish are excellent at camouflage. Now, most of the time when we see animals camouflaging, it's because they're hiding from predators. So they're hiding in the sand, they're staying away from predators, but the flatfish is different. The flatfish is actually hiding from prey. So the flatfish is what's called an ambush predator, meaning it's going to sit there, it's going to hide, it's going to not let anyone see it, and then as soon as its prey swims by, it's going to launch out of the sand, grab onto it, and eat it. So that's how they find their food. They're really unique because of that. Oh, everyone is saying camouflage. Excellent. Great job. We're saying that this is an animal that loves to camouflage. Very good. What was that? They blend in. Very good. Now, something unique about this flatfish is that it wasn't born looking like this. In fact, it was born swimming straight up and down like a regular fish with one eye on each side of its head, just like most fish. And as it grew, within a couple of days, it only takes a couple of days, it goes through this transformation. And during this transformation, its eye actually rotates. So you'll notice that it actually has two eyes on the top of its head. And that's because what's the benefit of having an eye on the bottom if you're going to spend all your time like this? They don't want to have one eye on the top and one eye in the sand. So what happens is as it grows, it will have one of its eyes rotate either across its head to the other side, or sometimes it rotates through its skull to the other side. And then it has two eyes on the top of its body. I wonder if we have a more clear picture of a flatfish. There we go. That's a great view. So you can see, looks like its tail is on this end. Its head is over here. You can't quite see the eyes, I don't think. But the eyes would be right over here on this side, and you can see how it lays in the sand flat like that. So flatfish are actually a group, a pretty diverse group of fish. So this includes things like halibut, flounder, turbot, lots of different types of fish fall into this category. And they do spend a lot of time in estuaries and other wetlands habitats. They can also be found in places like sandy bottom habitats. So if you went to the beach, there might be halibut swimming around there, and other types of habitats as well. Oh, that's a great question. What do they eat? So we talked about that a little bit. They are ambush predators, so they eat fish that's swimming by, basically. They'll eat smaller fish. Then when that fish swims by, the halibut launches out, grabs onto it, and is able to eat it. Now remember that some halibut, not the flatfish living in a wetlands, but other types of halibut can get to be like 6 feet long. So they can eat pretty big fish because they can get to be pretty large animals. The other question that we had is, how do they breathe? That's a really great question. So they are a type of fish. Remember that fish have gills that help them to breathe. So the water goes in through their mouth and it passes out over their gills and out. It's called their operculum. It's basically that bony covering that you see. So the water will pass out through that operculum, and while it passes over their gills, they pull all of the oxygen out of the water. So when we see flatfish like this, they do have a gill on this side that is where they will do most of their breathing from. It will pass in through their mouth and then out over that gill. Very good. Yeah. Yes, for those. Awesome. So we got some questions about whether frogs or worms would live in this environment. That's a really great question. Worms definitely live in this environment. So we see, like living in the mud, we can see lots of little worms and that sort of thing. And remember, our birds love to eat things like worms in our wetland habitats. Frogs also do live in these wetland habitats. So frogs can be in a lot of different types of habitats, including these wetlands habitats. What types of animals eat flatfish? That would be big birds. So we might have birds. Remember, we talked about those eagles. Do the eagles come to visit the wetlands? If they see flatfish, definitely that would be a perfect food for them. So that'll be birds coming to eat those flatfish. Very good. And awesome. Okay, so let's go back to that wetlands. I want to take a look back at one of our wetlands habitats and see what are other things that we notice. Oh, this is really cool. We talked about the importance of these wetland habitats. Another reason they're really important is because these wetland habitats serve as a stopping point for migrating birds. So we might have some birds that live their whole lives in the wetlands, and we have other birds that will just visit the wetlands occasionally. So they'll fly through on their long migrations, and they'll use it as a spot to take a break, find some food, and then they'll continue on that long distance migration. Now I want to take a second to talk about why wetlands are so important. We talked about why they're important. I want to talk about what we can do to protect our wetlands. Wetlands are really threatened by development. So remember how we talked about how wetlands are often right between the ocean and land. Now, the ocean and land, that's kind of the ideal real estate. People love to live there. They want to have that beachfront property. They want to build things right next to the water. And so that area is often used for development. So for building things like homes and neighborhoods and cities. And we can see here that we can see this really extensive development in this wetlands habitat. Now, it's estimated that about 90% of the wetlands in California have been developed. So things that you can do to protect wetlands is making sure you're supporting things like reserves and protected areas. We've got a couple of really, really great protected wetlands habitats here in Southern California if you're looking for a place to visit these wetlands. A really great one is Bolsa Chica. If you've ever been to Bolsa Chica wetlands, it's a really great spot to be able to walk around. You can do some bird watching, you can look for animals, see what types of wildlife you're able to find there. Another great one right here in Long Beach is the Colorado Lagoon area, has a really great wetlands habitat. So you can visit these wetlands, make sure that you are protecting them. So things like picking up your trash, making sure that your trash isn't going to end up in that wetlands habitat is really, really important. So definitely make sure you're working to protect our local wetlands. That's a really great question. Again, do birds migrate? Yes, we definitely see birds migrating through here. One of the big ones that we see in this area are terns. We can see terns that stop in this area during certain times of the year on their migration. So here you can see a tern. These birds migrate really long distances, and they're stopping here in Long Beach is really important. They actually stop near the port area of Long Beach and Los Angeles, which is really cool to get to see. What was the other question? Do they make nests? Yes. So because the baby birds are often born here, they do make nests here in these wetland habitats. I want to take a second because we love talking about baby birds. Let's take a second to take a look at some of the baby birds that we've had born here at the aquarium. We have been really fortunate actually to have some baby birds born in our shorebirds habitat. These are the black stilts that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So we had black-necked stilts born a couple years ago. Now you'll notice that these birds are a little bit fluffier than their parents are. Let's see if we can get a look at what they look like as adults. Here we go. So this is an adult black-necked stilt. Again, we see these long legs, this long beak, and notice that coloration. It has that dark on the top, light on the bottom. This is a coloration that we call counter shading. So it's really great for helping animals hide. We also see counter shading in things like penguins and orcas and sharks and other animals. Basically, it means that if an animal is above them looking down, they're going to blend in with the dark below them. But if this bird is flying and there's an animal below them looking up, their white belly is going to blend in with the light coming in from the sky. Now, notice this bird has a few extra legs. You can see there's a couple extra legs here. Those are their babies. So the black-necked stilt will hide all these babies underneath them right after they're born. Another way of keeping their babies safe and close by keeping them all under their body. It was really fun when they first had them. We let the eggs hatch and we kind of let the birds take care of their babies in the way that they naturally would. And so for the first day or so, we were like, are there 4 of them? Are there 5 of them? Because we keep trying to count the legs and see how many birds there were hiding under there. Let's take a look back at those babies because I want to see how their coloration is different than this black and white coloration that we see for the adults. Awesome. So here we can see this coloration is a little bit different. And I wonder how these colors would help this baby survive. It's different than the coloration of the adult, but if you notice, it looks really similar to the habitat that it's in. It's kind of got this speckly color, lots of browns, so it's able to hide there really well. Great observation. Now we're getting a couple questions about what other types of animals live there. Someone was asking specifically about sharks. Wetlands are another important habitat for sharks and stingrays, and that's because those babies need a safe place to grow up. So remember that when baby sharks are hatched from their egg, they don't have any sort of care from their mother. So their mother will lay the egg and then swim away and the baby will hatch on its own. So from the day it hatches, it's all on its own. So it needs to be in a safe, protected area. And so wetlands are one of those habitats that baby sharks or baby stingrays are often born. Someone is also asking what sorts of mammals live there. That's a really great question. We've got lots of different types of mammals that might live there. Things like foxes, raccoons, mice, rats, shrews, rabbit. So lots of different types of mammals live in this habitat as well. Of course, those mammals have to be a little bit more careful because they want to make sure they're staying on the lands part and not going into that water part. So when we look at that wetlands habitat, there are some animals that live only on land, like these mammals. There are some animals that live only in the water, like the fish and the stingrays. And then there are some animals that are able to live on both the water part and the land part, like those birds that we saw. Yeah, so do falcons or predatory birds live there? Definitely, they can visit there. It's a really great food source for them, so they'll often visit there to find food, especially when we get to areas like Southern California where everything is so developed. That's often a really natural space that will attract other animals to live in this really complete habitat. Awesome. So we're wondering how long these birds can live. Black-necked stilts, like these ones here, can live up to about 12 years or so. So again, it just depends on the species. Oh, our mangrove forest wetlands. What do you guys think? Our mangrove forest wetlands. Remember we talked about what makes a wetland? So you're talking about how it's an area where the land meets the water. So areas like marshes and swamps. Now, if you're familiar with mangroves are these trees that grow in the water. And so the roots will actually be growing directly into the water. And so that definitely means that's an area where land meets the water. Mangroves are really, really important in tropical communities. They are really important for protecting those coastal communities. So what we see is that in some places, they try to develop those areas. So they'll remove the mangroves and bring in a bunch of sand so they can make these really beautiful white sand beaches. And the problem is that without having the trees and the roots from the mangroves holding into that ground, you end up seeing a lot of coastal erosion. So then they see that beach and that area kind of erode over time. So protecting things like mangroves in the tropics and our wetlands here in California is really important for protecting the land right on the other side of that wetlands. Are animals in wetlands cold-blooded? Great question. Again, it depends on the animal that we're looking at. So when we see things like those mammals, those foxes and those raccoons, those are going to be warm-blooded. But then we can see other animals, like we might see some reptiles or some amphibians there. Those ones will be cold-blooded. So it just depends on the type of animal. We can have both warm-blooded and cold-blooded animals living in a wetlands habitat. Do we have any last questions? Do sea urchins live in wetlands? That is a great question. Sea urchins are not generally found in wetlands habitats. They're usually found more in fully salt habitats. So places like kelp forests or tide pools are areas where we often will see sea urchins. One thing we actually didn't touch on is the fact that because wetlands are often between saltwater and freshwater, they're in those estuary areas, they usually will have what's called brackish water. So that water is a mix of salt and fresh. So it's kind of that mixture of both types of water. And so because of that, the animals that live there will often have to be able to survive with that brackish water. So there are some animals that can only survive in salt water and some that can only survive in fresh water. And the animals living in the wetlands habitat have to be able to survive in brackish water. Can we make more wetlands? There are certain things that we can do to help restore wetlands, to help protect wetlands. But once we've kind of built up on them, that can be really difficult. So it's really important that we protect the wetlands that we still have and make sure that we are protecting them from things like pollution and further development. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our class. I have loved all the questions. Thank you so much for participating. Teachers, one last time, if you haven't already, please text us the number of students that you have joining you today. That really helps with our numbers to keep track of how many people we're reaching each week. So again, if you have any further questions, you can text or email those questions to us, and teachers text us how many students you have. I've really enjoyed getting to chat with you today. We're going to be back in 30 minutes to talk about the deep sea. So if you'd like to join us at 10 o'clock, we're going to be talking about the deep sea. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.